Welcome to another broadcast of Truth Be Told, where we believe in experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet. Joining me in studio, because Captain Ron is not in studio today, we have intuitive Tricia Carr. Today we're going to be talking about the giant rock. We have local historian Barbara Harris with us today to talk about giant rock. In Joshua Tree, we're going to talk about how the Native Americans consider this a sacred ground and to find out how this 25,000 ton, 7 stories high granite stone has so many mysteries and folklore about it. So please welcome to Truth Be Told, Barbara Harris. Welcome to the show, Miss Barbara. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Well, we are excited to have you here, and B, that we are in Hollywood, California. You have the lovely Tricia Carr. You know, she is a intuitive and host here at UBN, so we're excited to have her with us today. But seeing we're in Southern California, and Giant Rock is not too far from us. It's in Joshua Tree, just a few hours away from us. And so we're excited to talk about it because I've never been there. Tricia has never been there.
I haven't.
I've heard a lot about it, so why not ask the expert, the historian, about Giant Rock? So could you explain what, who and what and all that good stuff about Giant Rock?
Oh, wow. When you tell the story of Giant Rock...
Yeah, just tell me what it is. Yeah, first of all, just tell me what it is.
What was that?
I know I said first of all, just what is, what's so significant about it? Because, there's a lot of rocks out in the desert.
Yeah,
so,
introduce us.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Giant Rock, it is a giant... it was once considered the largest freestanding boulder in the world, and not to be confused with Ayers Rock in Australia.
Right.
This is a boulder. So it's a boulder that just sits out in the desert, and people often wonder how it got there. And through my presentations and talking, I'll tell you how it gets there. And again, this boulder is approximately about 5,800 square feet. And it stands about 7 stories tall, and it's made of granite, and it just sits out in the desert. And over time, people have, especially the Native Americans, they had an intuitive pull to this rock, noting that it was somewhat of a spiritual area. And over time, it had grown in its spirituality because it grew through many people coming out to the desert over time, and it had a reputation of being noted for its UFO spotting. It has known for its vortexes, and it sits in a very unique spot on the Earth's longitude and latitude. So the Giant Rock is very unique, and I'm often, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. There? Yeah, we're still here.
And I'm often very amazed that people are now starting to get in tune with the rock, because in its early days, back in the 19th century, people knew about it. People were aware of its power in its vortex, and it seems like we're coming full circle again, and people are being drawn back to the rock out here in the Mojave Desert.
So why was it not the rock itself, or was it the rock that the Native Americans considered that particular spot, or just the area sacred?
Well, they used the rock as a sacred spot, a gathering spot. But the whole area is somewhat very special. And it sits on because of the weight of the rock, it's been calculated that it puts pressure on the Earth in that particular spot. And with the longitude and latitude of the Earth, we're very close to the 33rd North parallel. Cool. And for many people who understand that scenario of the 33rd North parallel and the mysteries of that number and what that entails, that 33rd North Parallel is known for one of the things it has is the most UFO sightings. And it also has a lot of mysteries involved with it. And if anybody cares to look that up on Google or anything, you'll see that 33rd North Parallel has a lot of mysteries attached to it, such as the type of experiences and things that have happened on the 33rd North Parallel. You'll find that that's where the Phoenix Lights have happened. It's where the Bermuda Triangle is attached.
Wow.
It's where the pyramids align. And so the rock and where it actually sits, it shares its energy. Those things all share its energy on that 33rd North Parallel. And that's what kind of makes this area of the Morongo Basin and the Giant Rock and the Integratron and even the whole area of Joshua Tree so special, is because we all sit on that 33rd North Parallel and very close to it. So that's why Giant Rock has a special calling.
Yeah, I can see that now.
Absolutely.
Now you said it's granite. Now are other stone in that area all granite too, or is this like granite out of nowhere?
Interesting. Well, when you go back to the geology of Giant Rock, the area goes back long time ago. And I tell people if they really want to really study the geology, you got to go to the Joshua Tree National Park website, because they have it broken down really well how the boulders in this area were made. But primarily, Giant Rock in its area was made from a volcanic. So you have that giant boulder being volcanically, blown out from a volcano not far, probably from the Amboy volcano. And at some point, this whole area was covered in water. And over time, the water, rose, it depleted, it froze, and boulders were formed, and it cracked and did all kinds of stuff. Now, you asked me if all the other boulders in the area were granite. Most of them are. However, there is an area right behind Giant Rock that is, we call it Crystal Hill. And it's really auspicious because while everything else is made of granite, there is a hill just behind Giant Rock that is made of solid quartz crystal.
Wow.
And it's really awesome. And back in the time when I did my research, people were telling me that way back in the time, when the Native Americans were here, that hill was actually so solid and so protruded so prominently with the quartz crystal that the quartz came out of the top of the hill so prominently that they were able to carve chairs out of the quartz at the top of the hill.
Wow.
Now, of course, over time and with people coming out there and wearing it down and doing the things that they do, you can barely recognize it as a quartz hill these days, sadly. But I do have some pictures that do date back to the 1930s and will take you up to the current date. So
that's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
Really?
That is amazing. And I've been to the Integratron, and I can't remember the gentleman that purchased it and then built it, but didn't he have some UFO encounters that told him to build in that area? Is that correct?
Yes. Now, that is George Van Tassel.
There we go, yeah.
And his story is very unique because when you tell the story of Giant Rock, there are three men that actually, and even the story of the Integratron, there are three men that are really attached to that whole area. And it works out to be a man named Charlie Ricci, Frank Critzer, and George Van Tassel. And what makes Charlie Ricci the important person in this story is because he was the first white man to ever come to this area. And in his story goes that he had a ranch, and he had the ranch where the Integratron now sits. And why his story is so important is because he was the first white man that was allowed and permitted to do ceremony with the Native Americans at Giant Rock. And then what makes him so important is because where he put his ranch, where the Integratron now sits, it is the only area at that time that he had water. And little did he know that where he put that water was where the Integratron will eventually be built. And the Integratron was eventually having 3 aquifers under the middle of the Integratron, which I'll talk to you a little bit about later. But getting to George Van Tassel, George Van Tassel eventually got to Giant Rock, and his story was very interesting because, you know, he had a friend out there named Frank Critzer, and Frank Critzer had a story that, you know, a lot of people listen to his story and they say he was a guy who went out there, and he's the guy who dug under the Giant Rock and made it his home. You ever heard that story?
I honestly didn't hear it until I started doing research on interviewing you. So.
Oh, but that many people will go up on the internet and they'll hear the story of Frank Critzer. However, most of the time, what they're going to hear and read on the internet is not true. I have not fully published the story of Frank Critzer yet, but the story of Frank Critzer, what you might read on the internet, it'll tell you that he was a German immigrant, that he came from Germany, that he came over here and he had a lot of lung problems and the whole thing, but he was actually born in the United States, and he made his way to California. He became friends with George Van Tassel, and when he made his way out to Giant Rock, there's a story of him being a hermit, and he didn't want to have anything to do with people. However, Frank Critzer was the man responsible for building Giant Rock Airport and building the 64 miles of roads that people these days actually still use going to Giant Rock. And where his story gets kind of odd is people say that that there were these sheriffs from Riverside that came up and threw tear gas under the rock and blew him to bits. However, that story is not altogether true, because what happened to Frank is that he actually, in 1942, there was this thing called the Old Man's Draft, and it required men between the ages of 18 and 64 to register for the draft. And Frank Critzer happened to be 52 years old, and he was required to register for the draft. And when he didn't want to go register, the sheriffs came out to, talk to him about registering. And when he refused to go, he basically went into a back room and he took a pair of binoculars that were loaded with dynamite and he attached them together and he blew himself up.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
So his story, yeah. And it's funny because if you have a minute, it's really funny because I could read you his death certificate that the family got. It actually proves that he did blow himself up. It reads something like, Frank Critzer took his own life by blowing himself to pieces when being questioned by deputy sheriffs regarding his failure to register for service. And he touched off an electric charge, body at Wilson Mortuary in Victorville, awaiting for disposition. So if anybody ever has an interest in Frank Critzer and his background, he's buried in Victorville, and you could always check him out.
That's great.
But after Frank Critzer blew himself up, that's when the story of George Van Tassel comes in. Because Frank Critzer and George Van Tassel were friends. And when George heard that his friend Frank blew himself up, he goes, honey, he turned to his wife Ava and says, there's some property out there in the desert now available. and he got kind of interested in moving his family from Santa Monica. Can you believe that? Move your family from Santa Monica to a rock, to live under a rock.
Oh, sounds good to me.
I don't know about you, but if my husband would have told me that, I think I would have just like, honey, I don't think so. But
so he's lost it.
This is where George Van Tassel and Ava Van Tassel, they had that pioneer spirit, and there was something very special about what their dreams were and what their spirits were about. So it was probably around 1947 that they picked up from Santa Monica area with his wife and 3 daughters, and they moved to Giant Rock. And then George filed to have final papers to file for Giant Rock to actually become an official airport. And then he also built a restaurant, believe it or not, 6-stool restaurant, so his wife could serve apple pie and hamburgers out there in the middle of the desert. So people would fly in their airplanes and drive in on those little bumpy roads that Frank Critzer had made, and they would eat apple pie and hamburgers. But George Van Tassel had something really extraordinary happen to him out in Giant Rock, because he claims that on one night he had a vision and a dream that there was a spaceship that came down onto Giant Rock Airport, and he had contact with these beings from Venus. And the beings from Venus, I like to paraphrase all this and kind of put it in my own words,
right.
But they basically told him that, you humans, you're coming along okay as a species, and you're doing okay. However, it seems that by the time you guys get it, you die. So they wanted to give George some technology and give him some information on how to build a machine or a structure that would help humans live longer or extend their life or heal. So, and that's how the Integratron got started.
That's great.
And that George's, start to how he started the Integratron and in his journey out at Giant Rock.
I'm curious, real quick. I want to bring in Tricia real quick, because Tricia is an intuitive, and we talked about this earlier about everything has energy. Everything has the ability.
Where there's energy, there's information.
Right.
So basically, there's consciousness.
Right.
Yes.
And so, do you feel as an intuitive, Giant Rock, not necessarily meaning it's more important, but because of the significance of like the Native Americans and people putting the energy around it.
Right.
Is that the significance that you think, or?
Well, I think it's both. I think that, yes, as Barbara was telling the story, I was feeling that it has been charged. So that minerals in the mineral kingdom in particular, people who work with crystal practitioners or intuitives like myself, we actually take something like a quartz crystal and we charge it. I mean, it has its own signature, but then we can also charge it with our own intention. And that's actually how it's used in our computers and our watches too. It's a quartz crystal, or crystals can hold much more information than anything else that we know. And this goes back actually to the lost city of Atlantis, the way that they were so advanced when they were is because of crystal technology, and they had learned that from off-planet beings, other ETs and stuff. So yes, I think it's a dichotomy of it having its own natural consciousness and power, and the significance of it being really large actually draws us to it, and then we have charged it with our higher consciousness and interest. And the thing is with crystals and with the minerals, if you take like a sliver of giant rock, it has just as much intention, as much consciousness, power, ability to hold as much information as the entirety of giant rock, how large it is. However, it understanding however it did get there, as Barbara was saying, we are drawn to its enormity, and that attracts us. So you see what I mean? It's like it actually has a greater intention because of its size, and almost like its sole intention of being that large was so that it could have this partnership with us, that we do charge it with so much information from our side. Does that make sense? I'm kind of like,
no, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And Barbara, what was the first time when you first walked upon in front of the giant rock? What was your feeling? What was your is it a vibration? Was it a vision? What did you feel when you walked to giant rock for the first time?
I'm going to age myself here because it was almost 30 years ago, and I was moved. I cried because I immediately became attached to that rock, and that's why my story is almost a part of giant rock now, because I tell people that I moved here to the desert almost to continue the story of giant rock. The rock had split in the year 2000, and when it split, there was a lot of stories that also went behind that, and there are different people that have stories about that. But there's a scientific reason why it split, and there's a spiritual side why it split. But I didn't know. I lived in Orange County at the time when that rock split, and we drove out here a couple days after it split, not knowing that it did. And when I drove up to the rock and saw that it had broken off, I was very moved, and I was feeling sad at first. But when I leaned against her and I felt the rock and the energy of the rock, all I felt and how she communicated to me, I call her a she because I have such a connection to her, this rock. And she had said that it was the year 2000 that this happened. And she was saying that it was time for her to release the information she had gathered for the eons. And by splitting it off, that she had now released her information for humanity to use. So, that's what I had got from it. And many times I tell people in the interviews and things that I do that I almost feel like Richard Dreyfuss in the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when he's so compelled to build the Devil's Tower with the mashed potatoes. Right. That's how giant rock became with me, because I have this constant need to keep digging further into this energy, to its research, and to keep finding out more of its background, and the story never seems to end. Every time I think I'm ready to publish or to have something ready to go with giant rock, something new will be uncovered, and it's been a very unique journey with this rock out here in the Mojave. I'm just fascinated, and every day I'm even more fascinated at how people are coming, and they're showing up to listen about this rock. And when you mentioned about, Tricia, when you mentioned about being charged with our energy and people showing up, there was a time in the 1950s that there was as many as 15,000 people who gathered at Giant Rock. George Van Tassel, in order for him to build the Integratron, he had to raise money. And one of the things he did is he developed a foundation called the College of Universal Wisdom. And he would have, they were called Spacecraft conventions, and he would hold them out at Giant Rock. And people would come and camp, and they would fly in airplanes, and they would be out there. And it got so popular that back in 1957, Time, I think it was Life magazine, even did an expose on Giant Rock. You can look that up on Google and actually see photos of Giant Rock back in 1957, because it became very even well known back then. And like I said, there was a time that it had been documented as many as 15,000 people had found their way to this little boulder, not little, but this
giant
boulder in the middle of the desert. And it fascinates me because there was no real communication back then. And you have to understand, there was no porta potties. There was no real communication. It was the same time Roswell was happening. We had, this was the 1950s and 1960s. We were just coming out of a war. It was a time when people wanted to express themselves. The contactee movement was happening. People wanted to come out and tell the world what was going on. And this boulder out in the middle of the desert gave them the opportunity to do that. And it has so much energy. It's so charged, and it has just a fascinating history.
So did we talk about? Did we actually talk about? No, did we actually talk about how it broke off? Because I know we said that
And what? And is the piece still just there? Did
they just
stay?
leave the piece where it lays?
Yes, the piece is still there. Now it was in February 21st of the year 2000, and there's two different stories that go. The first one, there was this, and I can't pronounce her name right. Forgive me. Her name is Shive Devi. She's a shaman from up Northern California. I'm so sorry for not pronouncing her name right, but she had a vision of the rock splitting, and she contacted people down here who knew about the rock, and she had talked to them about praying and mentioned that this was going to happen, and the rock was going to split, and they should be drumming, and they should be praying because the rock was going to split. And in her opinion, she quoted a Hopi prophecy saying that if the rock split down the middle, that humanity was going to be, destroyed, and we were not going to go on as a species. However, if it split on either side, that we would continue to grow, and we would, evolve. Fortunately for us, it did split on the one side, and it did split as she had predicted. So I give her credit for that. However, as a historian of the area, I often have issues with the story and some of the things that go with that, because the Hopis do not have anything to do with this area. The Hopis never came to Giant Rock. We have 4 nomadic tribes that were involved in this area, and the Hopis weren't one of them. But I do give her the kudos and the she did call that with Giant Rock, and she has a very spiritual connection to Giant Rock. However, the real story behind what really happened was that there were people camping out at Giant Rock, and they happened to have a Volkswagen engine, and they were burning it. They set it on fire, and they set it on fire at a place on the rock that happened to have a kind of like a stress fracture.
Right.
And if anybody knows anything about Volkswagen engines, they have a lot of magnesium, so they burn really fast and really hot. And when they caught it on fire, it burned really fast. And when they heard the rock splitting and cracking, they basically ran. And they never really came forward to talk about it because they had overwhelming guilt about what had happened, because they knew they had, destroyed a monument in a local monument that was very, revered in the area. So, but it was reported as a, fire that had, cracked the rock. Well, there are two sides to every story.
I was going to say then, but when you said that you felt that she was wanting to release,
I think it's
information.
Both. Exactly.
Yeah.
I would love to share a story that I have with a tree that I connected with one time. It's this big, beautiful tree that's over on a trail off of Fryman Canyon here in Studio City. It's in the Santa Monica Mountains. And I was connecting with this tree. So I'm an animal and nature communicator. As Barbara is saying, she connects with and receives information and, real intelligent expression from Giant Rock. This is something that you can actually experience with pretty much anything on this plane, in this world. And so I was connecting with this tree, and I noticed that this tree had, on a large part of a branch, someone had carved the name Lomeli into the tree, and it really deeply, really injured, from my opinion, deeply into the bark of this tree. And it said Lomeli, and as I connected with this tree, I apologized, like, on behalf of humans, and I said, I'm sorry that happened to you. And I felt the tree explain to me, that's okay, because when this person, Lomeli, presumably, did this, I actually sent healing energy to him, and I healed him. And for whatever compelled this person to do this, I was able to lift them up and receive that. And I'm not injured. I'm still here and I'm well, and I was able to heal. So it's, you know what I mean? Like it meant something. Even though those people feel guilty, that's true. And they did do something that maybe from one perspective was irresponsible. Yes, that's true. But on the other side, Giant Rock explained that she actually was ready to release something. So in a way, there's some kind of love can actually redeem a mistake or an irresponsibility, It's interesting, I think. I think it's all true, like you're saying, Barbara. There's more than one perspective, and they're all valid.
Yes. And there's a purpose, and that's why I feel that in many cases that's why we should not judge many of our cases, because we don't know the whole stories behind the stories, because we don't live in the other, the other space, the other person's shoes, the other, so, that this is a lesson in not judging the whole story. And as I learned that very much as a historian, and when I started doing these presentations, this has really taught me to present the information and allow people to make their own judgments based on the information that I present. Because, a lot of people, I find that they either are interested in the Native American side of it, or they're more interested in the UFO side of it with George Van Tassel. And then some people really have an interest just in Frank Critzer's side and what he went through with his story. So that's why, this has become such a connective story, an interweaving story with Giant Rock. She's got such a great story. I love just telling her. It's a great myth, legends, and and it has great character.
I'm curious, when you said also she released her knowledge, who has received that? Has anyone come forth, or have you received what knowledge that she wanted to release to the world?
Here's what I could tell you. When I get information, I see pictures. Mm-hmm. And when she was telling me that, I saw a library cards, and I saw library cards that were being opened, and library cards being opened and sent off into the ethers. So, in other words, she has attained centuries of information that of just by being there on the earth, and her experiences of what she has experienced, and she was able to release her energy then into the ethers and allow humans to use what she has, acquired. And now, since that time, since the year 2000, that giant rock has just become a new magnet, and we're evolving with giant rock daily. It has had its challenges because it, locally, the desert and many parts of the desert has become a dumping ground for garbage and trash and graffiti, and even the national park has had difficulty with graffiti. And but I'm finding now, through people being more aware of giant rock and knowing what's going on out there, we now can clean up, and we now can do things, and people come up to giant rock, and it's so amazing for me to go out there and just sit. And there are people from all over the world that will just show up out there now, and it thrills me. It makes my heart go pitter patter, and it's very amazing, because it's kind of come full circle from the time of Van Tassel and back in the 1950s. So it's very exciting to see it coming full circle. And now, with the work I put forth with Giant Rock Project, the awareness is how do we keep the rock free of graffiti, and how do we keep the place clean of the trash? And we're able to do that now just by with social media and making people more aware, and through education. Just even being on your show, years ago, I never would have had an opportunity like this. So I thank you very much.
Well, we thank you for being on the show, and we just have a few minutes left. I'm curious now, does Giant Rock, is it on public land, federal land, or is it private land, reservation? Which one is that?
It's Bureau of Land Management. It's public land. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it difficult sometimes, because it's like the wild, wild west out there sometimes. Wow. Right. Yeah, you can go out there and people shoot guns. They're not allowed to, but they do. Right. People put off bombs, and there's a lot of off-roading, and people go out there and party on weekends, but yet there's the opposite. People go out there and do art installations and drumming and chanting and sit quietly and meditate. So for every opposite, there is I don't want to say good and bad, right, but that's kind of how it goes. It kind of balances itself somehow.
Is the Giant Rock Project trying to get this to be a historical site, or a federal, or how are you moving forward with that?
We've let me put it this way. When I was president of the Historical Society, I had a lot of dreams, and that's how I would have loved to have had it tagged as a historical site. Mm-hmm. However, that is almost impossible challenge. And right now, I'm working on a project of making the highway, Scenic Highway 247, a designated highway. And we have a small group that's doing that. And by doing that, we have the ability to have a little leeway in what we do with the rocks and how far people can see out, and also too to regulate how much we have an issue with a lot of the renewable people coming out, taking large areas of the desert and putting up solar panels and
great.
And
that's great.
Wind turbines. You know, pretty much how you were in the lower desert. You know how it sees like those big wood turbines. Yeah, that's what they want to do up here up by Giant Rock. And in fact, there are areas of Giant Rock that have been designated to have solar panels all over those hills. So we're always in a constant battle and a fight to ward off a lot of the solar panel people who want to buy up the public land.
Yeah, well, good for you.
In order to keep renewables.
Good for you. Well, I know. Like I said, I've been to the Integratron. I've been to Joshua Tree, but I've never been to Giant Rock. So that's going to be a destination I want to come see. And
definitely, yes,
we'll have to go out there. I would love to see you there. I
would love to. Yes, I would love to connect with her and receive. I can't imagine the inspiration, the knowledge, the profound wisdom she could impart.
So, but Barbara, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you and trying to preserve this.
Yes, thank you for your work.
Yes, we really appreciate it.
Beautiful work.
And if anybody, the best way to always get in contact through us is through Giant Rock Project on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Do have a website, but I'm not real good at keeping it together. So I do little tidbits of history on Facebook, and I try to keep that going a little bit better. So I appreciate you having me on.
Well, next time we're going to see you in person out there, so you can give us that tour.
I would love that.
Please do.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening to another broadcast of Truth Be Told. Tricia Carr is here. Please, Tricia, tell us where they can find you and hear you and all that good stuff.
My website is triciacarrcharm.com. I'm live every Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific here on UBN Radio on Channel 1. My show is called Charmed Life with Tricia Carr, and you can find that on all of the podcast outlets, Charmed Life with Tricia Carr. And I also have a YouTube channel with my Charmed Life episodes and other different kinds of intuitive teaching, channeling, and all of that kind of stuff. You can find that at youtube.com/Tricia Carr.
And Truth Be Told, go to truthbetoldwebtv.com. Check out all our upcoming guests. You can follow me on Twitter at On Air with Tony, and check out our YouTube channel. Subscribe, and then just type in Truth Be Told. You'll find it. And until next time, right here on Truth Be Told, we appreciate you, and we'll see you then.